Good morning. This is the Bob Unger Show. Welcome. And we have a very interesting guest today, as we always do. His name is Rabbi Menashe Bovit, and he has a very diverse Jewish experience. He's a rabbi, and he's been through a lot of iterations within the rabbinate and Judaism. And we're going to be discussing Judaism and the Jewish people, and why it is that so many Jews today, a very large amount, the majority, I would say, do not believe in the tenets of Judaism, and why that is, and how that came to be, and what Judaism is, and how do you define it. So, Rabbi, would you give us just a little bit of a rundown, briefly, on your background and how you came to be where you are now?
Well, it's a long story, Bob.
Yeah, we'll never be able to get into the details, but just briefly.
All right, so I'll give you the Kitzer version, like in Shulchan Aruch. There's the Code of Jewish Law. There's a Kitzer Shulchan Aruch. Although I'm not recommending a Kitzer Shulchan Aruch. That's a whole other story. I don't have the time to talk about. But that means an abbreviated Shulchan Aruch. I'll give you an abbreviated background on myself. So I'm the son of a Holocaust survivor. And I grew up with my father's stories, which I think that, and just the way I grew up, the kind of home I grew up in, a traditional home, imbued me with a strong Jewish identity. And his stories really made an impact on me. And later in life, I realized just how miraculous they were. His survival was. As a young man, that kind of gave me this feeling that my life had to have some kind of purpose. There was a reason why I existed in this world, why my father survived. Even as a young man, I felt this. And I ended up initially, as a teenager, getting involved in leftist politics. I was an anti-Vietnam War activist. I went from there into the anti-nuclear movement. Was part of civil disobedience actions against building nuclear power plants. I was very active politically. And then things started to come together at one point. I'm going very quickly in my own background, where I had gone back to college, and while at the University of Arizona, I experienced leftists who were protesting against the state of Israel. And there was a fellow who I had looked up to, an older guy who was a folk singer, and I play the guitar and sing also. And he was carrying a sign that had a Magen David, a Jewish star with a swastika inside, and said, "The true face of Israel." And I was just shocked, blown away by what this guy was doing. But I didn't have enough information really to argue with him. I only had emotional arguments that just seemed wrong to me. So that kind of began my journey. Along that way, on that journey, I met Rabbi Shlomo Karlebach, who became, I call my Rebbe of love, and that's who I have my smicha from, my ordination from. And I encountered Rabbi Meir Kahana, who became my Rebbe of Gevura, of Jewish strength. And my path since then was to educate myself. I ended up, of course, once a person, it's interesting, the people who are the biggest zombies call themselves woke. They're completely zombie-ized. They don't think, they just follow whatever the leftist dogma is, no matter how counterintuitive and how ridiculous and nonsensical it is, they follow it. So that's what they call themselves, woke. But I actually had kind of an awakening at that point. So I moved very quickly, but it took over time, many years actually. It wasn't that quick, but it was a movement from the political left to the right. And but I brought my activism with me, and I became a rabbi, and I ended up, though I was, have smicha to be an Orthodox rabbi, I ended up with a career in conservatives, which is a contradiction in terms. The conservative synagogues are nothing. There's nothing conservative about them. They're festering sores of liberal left-wing. Liberal is not the right word. A leftist pus probably is what the conservative movement should be seen as. But I ended up going to these conservative style synagogues for many years. I ended up bouncing around mainly because of my political ideas, and which the foolish, old-fashioned Jewish liberals, teachers union types who run these synagogues, they would like me initially, and then they would freak out when they understood what I really believed and how I perceived the things. I bounced around for many years until I came to Queens, and I've been in my synagogue here for 14 years. And it's a big bracha to me, a big blessing. I'm in a synagogue where the people that are left of the synagogue are all politically conservative, let's call them, and are entirely supportive of me as the rabbi. And so it's a big bracha. I don't have those kind of stresses anymore, and I'm able to, without any hindrance, be involved in a lot of different political organizations and speak freely. Every Shabbos when I give my drasha, when I give what's called my drasha, my sermon, I can speak freely. And people say, well, Rabbi, should you not, maybe you shouldn't talk politics. To me, it's not politics. If the Torah doesn't inform everything that we do in our lives, in every arena, whether it's the personal arena or the arena of society, if the Torah is not informing that, the Torah is just a play toy. It's just an amusement, and I don't believe that's what it is. I believe the Torah is the true foundation of how an individual should live his life, and so therefore, I try to take the ideas of the Torah and infuse them into our life situations that we share and politically, sociologically in this country. And that's what I do on a regular basis. And I don't believe there's anything contradictory about it. I think Rabbi Kahana would agree with me, and I think Shlomo would agree with me also.
Now, to be a Jew who is congruent Judaism, in other words, who actually represents the ideals of Judaism, the morality of Judaism, what are the essential things that you have to believe in order to be a Jew who is in parallel or with some consistency follows Judaism?
Well, we know the Rambam, Maimonides, has his 13 principles, but kind of distilling what we could pull out of that and from other traditional Jewish sources, it could really be simplified down even further. One, first of all, has to believe in God. I mean, it's interesting enough that you find that the majority of Reform rabbis are atheists. I call them deform rabbis. The redestructionist rabbis, they've redefined God. They'll say God is nature. God's feeling good. God's being nice. Right, so they're idolaters. That's just nonsense. It comes from Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan, the founder of the Redestructionist movement. Had originally been an Orthodox rabbi. He was actually a very bright, scholarly man. However, he had a little problem. He didn't believe in Hashem. He didn't believe in God. So he became a conservative rabbi. And at that point, the conservative rabbi still believed in God. And so he was like, it's not for me. So he started his own thing. And then you have the conservative rabbis of today, mentioned that. These are lunatics, the absolute mishagoyim in Jewish. I mean, these people in the conservative movement today is the Reform movement with a little smear of corned beef on top, basically. That's what it's basically. It's a little bit more Jewish style than the Reform, but it basically is entirely absorbed the Reform perspective. The conservative movement have been founded basically on the principle. The history of this is that when the Reform movement was started, and you and I have spoken about this before, the founders of the Reform movement were probably Illuminati types. These were people who were involved in some very wicked stuff, taking people away from God, taking people away from Hashem. And they said that Judaism had to be reformed. Well, criminals have to be reformed. Judaism doesn't have to be reformed. Judaism is emes, is truth. And so these individuals, they felt that Judaism had to be reformed, like as if Judaism's a criminal. And how do you reform Judaism? Judaism, everything that we do that is Jewish, which are called mitzvos, commandments. A mitzvah does not mean good deed. Cowardly rabbis made that up so they wouldn't get their board angry and get themselves fired. They said there was commandments. That means you have to do something. The board didn't want to do anything Jewish, so they might fire them. So they said, oh, mitzvah means good deed. So in any case, what happened is there was these Reformed rabbis came into being, and they totally were stripping Judaism of all of its content and saying the only thing you had to follow were the ethical and moral teachings, which of course they don't follow those. They don't follow any of those either, right? And so there was a group of rabbis who were sympathetic to the fact that Judaism perhaps had to have some modernization, had to be open to some new information, had to be open to some scientific information. They kind of were thinking like that. But they didn't like that the Reform movement had gone wild. They put on this big convention where they served frog legs and did things like that. So they broke off and they started a movement to conserve Judaism. And actually, at the time, it was kind of very much like what we call more modern orthodoxy today, which is like a Torah Umada, Torah and scientific knowledge combined together. And so those individuals founded this conservative movement that was supposed to maintain the essentials of Judaism and maintain somewhat of a halakhic Jewish law structure. However, it would be open to some new ideas and change and research. It was taken over entirely by wicked people who were no different than the Reform. They just wanted to put a little bit of a traditional schmear on top, as I said. And today, in the conservative movement, if you have a transgendered rabbi, quote unquote, say rabbi in quotation marks, that's the highest mark your congregation. They for years they've only wanted female rabbis, which I don't believe a woman can be a rabbi. I believe that's a male paradigm. But in any case, talking about whatever genuine Judaism.
Just to stop you there just for a second, the typical Jew of today will say, "Where is it written that women can't be rabbis?" I get that all the time. What is your response to that?
Well, getting to what authentic Torah is will give you that answer. You start whatever authentic Judaism, Torah is the foundation of. And by Torah, we don't just mean the written Torah. It's called Torah Shebekatab. It's the written Torah, right? There's also Torah Shebaal Peh. There's the oral Torah. And traditional Jewish belief has it is that you would call it, like using a computer analogy, you would say it's like the hardware and the software. The Torah is the hardware, and the oral Torah the written Torah is the hardware. Oral Torah would be the software, because the Torah itself sometimes it's hard to understand. Sometimes it's very clear what it's saying. Sometimes it's not so clear, but you need to have the software to be able to operate it. And
in other words, the oral Torah is, besides receiving the written law at Mount Sinai, Moses also received from God, from Hashem, the oral Torah, as you say, the operating manual for the Torah.
But in that operating manual, it's not like as if it's a written manual book. People, like, for instance, we have the Talmud, and that's part of the oral law. So what the oral law is more of a methodology, which is ongoing. You can always do what's called mechadesh kedushim. You could come up with new interpretations as long as they fit into the structure that the oral Torah gives you. So in other words, you can't say, if the oral Torah is just coming up with new stuff, I decided that my understanding, my interpretation is that God is a gigantic pink elephant who every day creates a new gender. You can't. That would be, that's, you could say that, but there's nothing to base that upon. In other words, it's called a shelshelis, a chain that goes back to Mount Sinai. So authentic Judaism starts out with the belief that there is a God. We say HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He. And this God is a God which is unlimited, which has no limitations. In other words, is not bound by time, space, has no needs. And in fact, the human being cannot actually completely understand what this God is, because we human beings are constrained by our physicality. No matter how intelligent a person is, that's based on the gray matter inside there. And the gray matter, no matter the most brilliant human being on earth, has a limitation even to his intellect. So because God is unlimited, so the human being cannot possibly entirely understand God. So we start out with that as a foundation. And then from there, there's an acceptance that this God has a purpose for the existence of this physical universe. And within this physical universe, therefore, this God has a determination as to what is right and what is wrong, what benefits this his creation. We use the term him because this God deals with us. There's paradigms. Once again, there's a male and female paradigm. And the primary way this God deals with his creation is in a more male sense, although we say that God is no gender also, but that's how we relate to God, because that's the structure God gave us for how we live on our planet Earth. And so there is a true right and there is a true wrong, and that's determined. And how do we know how does God determine it? Through this something called the Torah, because authentic Judaism says that this God needed, using that term is also what we call a kaviyachol, if it would be possible, because God has no needs, but we have needs. So to be able to meet our needs, God created something called the Jewish people. And so the Jewish people are to be what's called the Mamlechas Kohanim, a nation of priests. We are supposed to represent God, the creator who's unlimited, Hashem, on planet Earth. And how we represent that God is through that Torah, which we are then supposed to exemplify through our own behavior, our own actions, our own adherence to the mitzvos, the commandments from that God. And then therefore we are supposed to then bring that is the metaphor is illumination of light, not like the Illuminati. That's the evil fake illumination. It's really darkness. We're supposed to then exude that light into this world, because actually every human being has purpose, because the Torah starts out saying every human being was created in the image and likeness of God, which means that every human being has purpose in this world. And the purpose is to make this a godly planet. And the only way you can do that is through the paradigm of these mitzvos. And it's not just for Jews. Jews we have 613 commandments in the Torah. They're not all incumbent on us upon all times and all circumstances, but they're there for when those times and circumstances exist. But there's also a structure of 7 basic commandments that are to the non-Jews. And once again, they spin off to many spin-off categories, but this God who created the world, there is purpose to creation, and every human being actually has a purpose in that creation, but that purpose involves connection to and obedience to that God. That's the basic Jewish message. If Tikkun Olam, which the lunatics in these liberal Jewish movements think Tikkun Olam means is that you have to worship people because they have a certain amount of melanin in their skin, or you have to decide, accept that there's all kinds of different genders, and that, and that men should be married to men and women should be married to women. Also, their Mishigas. Tikkun Olam actually means the rectification and repair of this world is through only the tools of the adherence to the mitzvos that are in the Torah. That's what Tikkun Olam is. The fake Tikkun Olam is the lunacy from the liberal movements in Judaism. I mean, like they push everything that it's actually. Remember Superman comics?
Yeah.
Remember Bizarro Superman? He did everything backwards. Okay, so the liberal movements of Judaism are Bizarro Judaism. It's like Bizarro Superman. They do everything backwards. So the Torah as the paradigm of Adam and Eve, whether one literally believes in a literal Adam and Eve, or whether Adam and Eve is a paradigm for the perfect union of male and female, that's what the Torah is telling us. Male and female create a whole together. We need to have the two sexes. They work together in harmony. A woman is an Ezer Kenegdo, means a helpmate corresponding to her husband. They work in harmony together, if that's the Torah model. I'm going to quote a non-Jewish leader. Remember Jerry Falwell?
Sure.
He said something that I quote all the time. He said, "The good Lord created Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve." So that it sounds cute, but it's true. If you have two men who are pretending to be in a loving, harmonious marital relation together, that's a destruction of the world. That's not a Tikkun Olam. That's a churban. That's a destruction of the world.
When I meet Gentiles and they see that I have these traditional biblical values, the thing they always say to me, and they're always afraid they're going to offend me, which of course nothing offends me, but they say to me, "Bob, I never met a Jew like you before. You seem so different. Why are the Jews the people of the book, God's chosen people? Why do so many of them, and today I would say it's most, reject those principles?" What would you say to them?
Well, you say the people of the book. You know, it's, if you would ask most Jews what they think the Torah is, you know, on Shabbos, we take the Torah, we lift it up, and and we do, it's called Hagba. When we're done reading, we lift it up, and like this, we hold the handles on the Sefer Torah, on the Torah scroll, go, this is the Torah of Moshe, right? We say. So you know what they do in Reform conservatives, in Reconstructionist synagogues? They hold up the New York Times, and they say, V'zos HaTorah. They think that they think the New York Times is the Torah, because they don't know better. Our whole generation is what we would call, you know, it's supposed to be that when you find a Jew and you're bringing a Jew back to Torah who has been totally misinformed, or it's likened to a Jew who had been kidnapped by anti-Semites and didn't ever have a chance to understand what it meant to be a Jew. We call it Tinik Shel Nishpa, somebody who was stolen away and taken hostage as a child. And here's my main student here, Schnuzzy, right here, my kitty cat. And
I understand that the kitty cat thinks that he's a horse.
well, actually, I don't want to get off track here, but there's a belief. Some people have a belief that cats are a Gilgul, a reincarnation, and that somehow for the fixing of their soul because of something they may have done in a prior incarnation, Gilgul, that they had to come back as a cat. But that's another story. I think Schnuzzy's a Gilgul. That's why she's here. But anyway, so you talk about these liberal Jews. 80% of Jews, 70-80% would identify, and identify usually today means a man wearing a dress, but they would identify as liberal Democrats or left wing or whatever, because they've been misled. Now, interesting enough, we're getting close to Pesach, Passover, and there's a teaching, and I have this book here. It's called the Moranayim. This is from the Chernobyl Rabbi, Rabbi Menachem of Chernobyl, and he lived in a time when Jews are very alienated from Judaism also. Compared to today, at least they all were observant to some degree, and they had knowledge to some degree of Jewish text and whatnot. But there was a lot of alienation that had taken place, and that's why the Hasidic movement had sprouted up, was to get Jews reconnected again. And they were struggling against two things. The Jewish establishment at that point was very disconnected from the typical Jew. And then you had this emerging thing that would become the Reform movement. It was in the Age of Enlightenment. The Illuminati and these other groups were emerging with this, once again, 180-degree, let's say, turning about against the traditional beliefs in God. And so Jews were being very alienated, both some of them because they were going out of Judaism and embracing alien ideologies and beliefs. And within Judaism, the establishment had oftentimes become hostile, and Jews were very turned off. So they had to come up with teachings to kind of reignite the spark of Yiddishkeit inside their Judaism, spark of Judaism inside the Jew. And so this movement came about that we called Hasidus. And Rabbi Menachem was from let's say the third generation of Hasidic rabbis, starting with the individual known as the Baal Shem Tov. And upon this week's Torah portion, which is called Vayikra. Vayikra is the book of Leviticus. It's the third book in the Torah, and we start the Torah reading of Vayikra this week. And the word Vayikra means "and called to," and it doesn't say. It doesn't say who's calling. We understand it's God calling the Moses, Hashem calling the Moshe, but it doesn't say it. And it's written with the word is written unusually with a small aleph. And without going into all the details of his teaching on that, he likens it. He says that these are hints to how we need to bring Jews close to Torah again. And he talks about that if there was somebody who was in a locked up building where there was no light ever came into the building, if you brought them into the bright light of the outside, they would be blinded by it. They wouldn't be able to handle it. Blinded by the light, like the song, right? You know, they'd be blinded by it. The people couldn't handle it. So you have to make a little crack and let some light in and get the person accustomed to having more illumination, more light. And so that's kind of like the situation we're in today. And that's why the rabbis when we go into the Seder, they go through all these talks about how only 1/5 of the Jews came out, only 1/50th of the Jews came out of Egypt, only 1/500th came out, because we say in Egypt, in that period of time, the Jews were at the Memtesh Shari Tuma, in the 49th gate of spiritual impurity. They had totally absorbed all the Egyptian culture. They had assimilated into the idolatrous culture of Egypt, in which they believed the Pharaoh himself was a god. So there's a parallel that's gone through many different chapters in Jewish history, where the majority of Jews are totally steeped in complete darkness and foolishness. They've absorbed all the idolatries of the host culture. And so that's where we are again today. But we know each time that happens is part of a cycle. It's called the Yerida Tzorach Li'aliyah. You have to hit rock bottom to bounce up to the top. And so therefore, that's where we are today, where the vast majority of Jews believe in complete idiocies. They're clueless about what Judaism is. They think what they consider to be wokeism if they're young, or liberalism if they're old, they consider that to be Judaism. They think the New York Times is the Torah. They don't have a clue. And depending on the individual, some of them are nice people who don't know better. And some of them have really become very wicked, and they do evil and destructive things because they are totally in the grip of what we call the Sitra Achra, the other side of Brother Satan. They're totally in the grip of satanic ideologies, which is really what the left is. Let's face it, what we call communism, the left, woke, progressive, whatever it is, it's really Satanism is what it is. And
tell us a little bit about your experience with Rabbi Kahana and your observations, and any thing you had in terms of interaction with Rabbi Kahana, and explain your perception of Rabbi Kahana.
Well, I met him a couple of times. I didn't really know him. I met him a few times. And but he had a big impact on my life. Now, as on the other side, my other Rabbi Shlomo, I had a very close personal relationship with. Rabbi Kahana, so I said, it's like the two hands, the left and the right. You have to have the right hand of loving kindness, and you have to have the left hand of Gevura, strength. And you have to know which hand is the correct hand to use at the moment. And when I met Rabbi Kahana, he really made a tremendous impact on me. And then when I started reading his teachings, here was somebody who was uncompromising in standing up for the Jewish people, as the Torah describes what a Jew is supposed to be like. And so he made a tremendous impact on me. And Rabbi Kahana was, once again, we're all creatures of our time. And in that period of time, there's all these different militant movements and movements about people that they should take pride in who they are. And yet the Jews are embarrassed about anything that's really Jewish and embracing everything that's not Jewish. And here was Rabbi Kahana, who's standing up strongly for the Jew and standing and saying that when it comes to a Jewish state, it shouldn't just be a state of Jews. It needs to really be a Jewish state. What makes it a Jewish state would have to be that the state has to be conducted according to what is authentically Jewish, not trying to bow down to whatever the latest du jour liberalism of the day is. So he made a tremendous impact on me. Now, I met him as a college student, and it was interesting that the media portrayed him as like a raving lunatic, as if he was like, Genghis Khan on steroids with a Magen David around his neck and a scimitar in his hand. But he was actually a very sweet and humble individual, and a real mensch. I mean, a guy who genuinely exemplified. There's a mitzvah of Ahavas Yisrael, love of your fellow Jew. And when he condemned the leftist Jews and what they were doing, people try to portray him as someone who was like a hateful individual. No, that's because it's because he loved the Jewish people. If you love your children, for instance, you don't sit there and embrace, you don't sit there if your child does something which is reprehensible, you don't tell your child, I don't love you anymore. You tell your child what you did is wrong, and I'm going to have to do what I have to do to get you to stop doing that, because what you're doing is hurting yourself and others. And that's where Rabbi Kahana was coming from, a tremendous Ahavas Yisrael, a tremendous love of the Jewish people. And he was willing to give his life for that. He really was, we talk, Muslims, they have their shaheed, their idea of being a martyr is putting a bomb on yourself and killing innocent people for a fake religion. That's your shaheed. Right, but Rabbi Kahana was a true martyr. He actually, I was with him the night before he was assassinated. He was in Florida. He spoke at the Young Israel in North Miami Beach. I had an opportunity to spend some time and talk with him, and he said on that night that he knew that he was going to be that someone was going to assassinate him. He knew that was going to happen. He knew that the wicked people, the evil people were not going to allow him to continue on with his message. But he wasn't going to compromise. He wasn't going to give in, even if it meant giving his very life. And he understood that, you know, we all live a certain amount of time. Some of us are blessed to live a natural life, that he, because of his outspokenness, because he stood up for the truth, because he was so uncompromising in his love for Torah, love for the Jewish people, his love for Hashem, that he knew that the evil people were going to remove him from the world, but that as long as he was uncompromising, others would then, in a sense, pick up the baton and run their length of the race, even if they weren't a powerful individual like Rabbi Kahana, who was like, I consider him one of the Gedolei Ador of his generation. I consider him one of the greatest rabbis of our time. And so he understood that, you know, even if that time was not going to be a long time of a natural life, that he lived it 100% as an Eved Hashem, as a servant to God.
And relate Rabbi Kahana's teachings and warnings to what's happening now in Israel with Jews being killed by terrorists, some gruesome attacks over the last few months. They're ongoing, and also the leftists and the right and the so-called right and the so-called left attacking each other, and all the controversy going there with the reforms. Briefly go into that because we only have a few minutes left.
Well, Rabbi Kahana understood something. People say, well, he was a hateful person. He was a racist. Well, Arabs are not a race, number one. We're somewhat related to them. We're also Semites. But he actually, in a sense, respected them because he understood that they have their own ideology. They have their own religion, Islam. They have their own belief system. They believe that this is mine, that we took this, we conquered it, it's mine. And you're not going to pay them off by giving them flushing toilets and universities and, you know, giving them free education and all these other things. He thought he could, you know, the liberal Jew thinks you could buy people off. Rabbi Kahana understood that there's a struggle between two people. There's a group that says that God gave us this land. This land is mine. God gave this land to me. There's a whole generation who kind of like loved that song, but didn't understand, you know, it comes from a cheesy movie. Actually, it's a great movie. But in any case, the Jewish people, Hashem, God gave us the land of Israel. The first Rashi in the Torah, in Bereshis, asks the question, why did the Torah start with the story of creation? And Rashi explains, because the nations of the world are going to say, Listamatem, you are Zionist hoodlums and thieves. You stole the land of Israel from the innocent Canaanite people. And that's a paradigm for all time. And that we say, no, God determines who land is given to. And so therefore, the Torah says God gave the land to the Jewish people. The Jewish people may have been exiled because of their lack of obedience to God, but the promise of that land and the promise of return is for all time. Now, the Muslims believe that Islam has abrogated Judaism, and that this is anything Islam conquers is forever belongs to Islam. So this is theirs. And you're not going to get them to say, "Oh, isn't that wonderful?" You know, we're going to just individual Arabs who are going to be smart are going to say, "I have a better life here than in an Arab country." But in general, they have their own innate Arab Muslim nationalism. So therefore, unless there's the few of them who will agree to live as what's called a ger toshav, which is a tolerated foreigner in Israel, who understands that there's Jewish sovereignty in the land, and that it's a privilege to live there under Jewish sovereignty, the vast majority of them are going to adhere to Arab Muslim nationalism, and therefore they're not going to accept the Jewish state regardless of the benefits you give them. And Rabbi Kahana understood that. So therefore we have this town, it's called Hawara, I think is the name of it, where Jews were just murdered recently there. But it's not an isolated incident. There was there was a Jew shot there last week also. And there's constantly fire bombs and rock attacks because they say this is ours and you Jews have to leave. So they have to leave. You know, when this Smotrich said that town needed to be wiped out, he was once a follower, I believe it was either him or Ben Gavir, one of them was a follower of Rabbi Kahana at one point. He was actually telling the truth. a town of Arab Muslims that wants to murder Jews who say you can't pass through this, this is ours, this town is ours, that town really needs to be removed. And any Arab Muslim who resists will be removed along with the town. That's what Rabbi Kahana's position was, 100% coherent. That's what the Torah tells us, that the only non-Jews who should be living in a Jewish state are those who adhere to the concept that this is a sovereign Jewish state, and they want to live there for whatever reasons. They want to be close to the God of Israel, but whatever reasons are positive reasons. It's not because they say, we are Fakistinians. I call them Fakistinians, not Palestinians. There's no such thing as a Palestinian. We are the Fakistinian people, and the Zionists took our land. If they say that, they got to go. That's what Rabbi Kahana taught us.
We have 1 minute left. Very quickly, tell people how they can follow you or get in touch with you, or see what you're doing, or read anything you write.
You could reach me at Bellerose Rabbi at proton.me. So that's one email, or belleroserabbi@yahoo.com. You can reach me at those email addresses. I have a Zoom service on Shabbos every week. Everybody could be invited to take part in that and my various different classes. This, once again, it's an easy email. BELLEROSERABBI at either yahoo.com or proton.me. You can reach me at either of those email addresses. Reach out to me, and I'll give you the information about how to participate.
Well, thank you very much. Shalom, and we'll talk again.
All right, and thank you.